Sometime today, you will probably tap a card and think nothing of it. In that half second, a company you never chose, never signed up with, and probably could not describe takes a cut. Do it at almost any store on the planet, and the odds are the network underneath is Visa. Last fiscal year, more than $15 trillion moved across Visa's rails. About 230 billion separate transactions from roughly 4.5 billion cards. And out of all that motion, Visa kept about $36 billion in revenue and turned nearly 20 billion of it into pure profit. That is a net margin around 55%, which makes Visa, per dollar of revenue, more profitable than Apple, Microsoft, or Google. Today, on Money Machines, how a company with no cards, no loans, and no stores takes a cut of almost everything you buy. Start by clearing up the biggest misconception in consumer finance. Visa is not a credit card company. Visa has never issued you a card. The card in your wallet came from a bank, Chase or Bank of America, or your local credit union. The bank sets your limit, lends you the money, eats the loss if you never pay it back, and collects your interest. Visa does none of that. It carries zero credit risk. What Visa owns is the network in the middle, VisaNet. A set of data centers that do one job. When you tap, they ask your bank whether this card is good for $62, hear yes, and promise the store it will get paid. Authorization, clearing, settlement. A financial switchboard. And owning the switchboard, it turns out, is a vastly better business than owning the money that moves through it. Follow one purchase through the machine. You buy $100 of groceries with a rewards credit card. The store does not receive $100. It receives roughly 97.50, sometimes less. The missing 2.50 is called the merchant discount fee, and it splits three ways. The biggest slice, around 2.20 on a premium rewards card, is interchange, and it goes to the bank that issued your card. A few dimes go to the payment processor that installed the store's terminal, and a sliver, roughly 14 cents, the network assessment, goes to Visa itself. Multiply that sliver by $15 trillion, and you have one of the great business models of all time. American merchants paid more than $180 billion in card fees last year, their second biggest cost after payroll, and every cent of it started with a tap. Here is the twist that makes the machine brilliant. Visa sets the interchange rates, publishes the fee tables, defines every category from supermarkets to airlines. But Visa does not keep interchange. The banks do. Why would a company set a price and hand the revenue to someone else? Because interchange is the bribe that built the network. Every dollar of it is a reason for banks to issue Visa cards instead of anything else. To mail offers, to fund rewards, to push Visa's logo into hundreds of millions of wallets. Visa recruits an army it never has to pay salaries to. It even hands the banks billions in direct incentives on top, more than $13 billion a year, to keep volume on its rails. The banks fight over borrowers. The merchants fight the fees. Visa just owns the road and clips a toll on every car. So what does Visa actually book as revenue? 4 levers. Service fees, a tiny percentage of every dollar of volume charged for access to the network. Data processing, about a dime of nearly pure margin every time a transaction is authorized, cleared, or settled, times 230 billion. International fees, the best lever of all, roughly 1% whenever your card crosses a border or a currency, which is why Visa loves your vacation even more than you do. And value-added services, fraud tools, tokenization, consulting, sold back to the same banks and merchants already locked into the network. Net it all out, and Visa's take is only about 1/4% of the money that touches it. That sounds like nothing. On $15 trillion, it is a $36 billion business running at a 66% operating margin. The machine started as a stunt. In 1958, Bank of America mailed 60,000 unsolicited, already activated credit cards to the residents of Fresno, California, an experiment remembered as the Fresno Drop. Fraud and defaults were a disaster. The program lost tens of millions of dollars, and it worked anyway. Within a decade, Bank Americard was everywhere. In 1970, the banks handed the system to an unusual visionary named D. Hock, who believed no single bank should ever own it. And in 1976, it was renamed Visa, a word pronounceable in almost every language on Earth. For decades, it ran as a cooperative owned by its member banks. Then in 2008, with merchant lawsuits piling up, the banks spun Visa out to the public, raising $17.9 billion in what was then the largest IPO in American history. The buyers got the toll booth just as cash began to die. Now the part that involves you personally, rewards. 2% cash back feels like free money. It is not. It is interchange, recycled. Premium cards carry the highest swipe fees precisely to fund the points. And merchants do not eat that cost, they price it in for everyone, which produces one of the most quietly regressive systems in the economy. A Federal Reserve Bank of Boston study found that the average cash-paying household loses about $150 a year subsidizing card users, while the average card-using household collects over $1,100, a transfer that runs from lower-income households to higher-income ones, because the affluent hold the premium cards. When you tap a heavy metal card and the register price is the same for everybody, the person behind you paying cash is helping fund your flight. Why has no one disrupted this? Because the network is a two-sided fortress. A new payment network needs millions of merchants before consumers will care, and millions of consumers before merchants will care. Visa starts every morning with about 4.5 billion cards on one side, more than 150 million merchant locations on the other, and each side makes the other more valuable. The honor all cards rule means a store that accepts one Visa accepts them all. The tech giants looked at this fortress and chose to move in rather than attack. Apple Pay, Google Pay, and most fintech darlings are, underneath, Visa and MasterCard transactions wearing better clothes. Together, the two networks carry roughly 85% of American card purchases. Economists have a polite name for that arrangement. Merchants have a less polite one. A machine this profitable attracts subpoenas. In 2011, the Durbin Amendment capped debit interchange for big banks at about 21 cents a swipe, and the banks responded by killing debit rewards and shrinking free checking. A preview of how this system defends its margin. Merchants have been suing over credit interchange since 2005. In 2024, Visa and MasterCard offered a settlement worth an estimated $30 billion in fee reductions, and a federal judge rejected it as too small. Then, in September 2024, the Department of Justice sued Visa for monopolizing debit, alleging that it pays potential rivals not to compete, including, according to the complaint, an agreement under which Apple promised not to build competing payment technology with internal documents describing such rivals as an existential threat. Visa denies the claims. The case grinds on. So what could actually break the machine? Probably not a startup, a government, or a new rail. In Brazil, the central bank launched Pix, instant, free, phone-to-phone payment. Within 4 years, it overtook cards as the country's most used way to pay. India's UPI did the same at even larger scale. America's version, FedNow, launched in 2023 and is still tiny, but the pipes now exist. Congress keeps circling with the Credit Card Competition Act, which would force the biggest banks to offer merchants a second, cheaper network on every credit card. And stablecoins let a big retailer imagine settling dollars in seconds with no interchange at all. Reports that Walmart and Amazon were merely exploring the idea knocked tens of billions off the network's market value in a single day. None of these has beaten Visa in America yet. All of them prove the toll is a choice. So how does Visa take a cut of almost everything you buy? It built the road everyone drives on, set a toll it mostly hands to the banks so the banks keep building traffic, and kept for itself about 0.25% of civilization's spending. At margins, software companies envy. No inventory, no loans, no factories. A company worth over $600 billion whose product is, essentially, a yes that takes less than a second. 60 years of network effects mean your money almost cannot move without paying the toll, and the only credible threats left are governments building free roads next door. As always, this is education, not financial advice. Do your own research and talk to a licensed professional before acting on any of it. Tomorrow, The Current is back with this week's real story of money in motion. Subscribe so you don't miss it.